Welcome back to Sissy Maya. Make sure to subscribe to our channel to never miss an update. Additionally, consider subscribing to my Patreon to get access to these features, and much more. Hayes, West London, April 18th, 2001, 8:05 a.m. Damn it, bloody hell, James Mills muttered, pressing a tissue against his split lip. The unexpectedly cold night had frozen his car lock, and no matter how he tried, the key refused to turn. Not wanting to fetch the de-icer, he bent down to warm the lock with his breath. Predictably, his upper lip froze to the metal. He yanked away, leaving the top layer of skin behind. Pain would linger. He was already running late. His ex-wife Helen's latest argument had done that. Now he had to rush to make it to work on time. Their fight, as usual, revolved around their 16-year-old daughter, Emily. Missing last night's visit to Emily due to work had caused another wave of tension. James feared their relationship was unraveling fast, all because of his demanding job. Helen was struggling too. The typical mother-teen clashes were escalating, and James, usually the peacemaker, had missed his chance to intervene. Helen made sure he knew just how bad it was. His work with the Metropolitan Police's Special Operations Department was chaotic. Irregular hours and unpredictable shifts had been the main cause of his divorce 2 years earlier. After stopping the bleeding, James started the car and headed to Ealing Underground Station for his commute into central London. Wood Street, London, April 18th, 2001, 2:24 p.m. Now officially Sergeant James Mills, he glanced at the stack of rent-a-crates by his desk, relieved his packing was done. The past few days had been slow as they prepared to move offices nearby. He was eager to dive back into real police work. The phone rang. Helen's voice on the line sent a chill down his spine. "Mike, it's Emily," she said, panic creeping in. "She's missing." "What do you mean missing?" "She was fine this morning when we spoke. She's not even due back from school yet." "How do you know?" James asked, concern rising. "Helen didn't call over small things. I was cleaning her room. I found a note. She's running away. She can't handle the tension between us anymore," Helen sobbed. James swallowed his anger and fear. "Calm down, Helen. Let's think this through. Try contacting her friends. She'd probably stay with someone she knows. Do you have their details?" "No," came the reply. "All right. Check with her school to see if anyone else is missing or absent. I'll call you in 15 minutes. Then he hung up. 10 minutes later, Helen called back. No one from Emily's class was missing. James advised her to wait. Runaways usually show up hungry and tired. He spent the afternoon anxious, hoping for news that Emily had returned safely. Rombe Moor, Yorkshire, April 18th, 2001, 8:22 p.m. Ted and Andy Lewis cautiously approached the landslide site reported last week. Though they preferred daylight, an elderly woman walking her dog had heard strange noises nearby, and they couldn't risk waiting. Spring nights on the moor were still bitterly cold. If anyone was trapped, hypothermia was a real threat. Night fell quickly beneath the starry sky. With flashlights sweeping the uneven ground, they stayed alert. The sound of shifting rocks about 200 yards away underscored their precarious position. Ted's warm breath fogged in the cold air. "That's probably Frank and Todd," he said. "The sooner we finish, the better." "Think anyone's actually out here?" Andy asked, eager to get back to his date with Lisa. He'd been trying to win her over for weeks and didn't want this to ruin his chances. Ted smirked, thinking of his own wife and the anniversary lingerie he'd bought her, a white lacy basque she promised to wear tonight. Married at 20 to 19-year-old Kay, their passion still burned strong. Andy's beam caught the yellow and black hazard sign freshly posted nearby. "This is where the noises came from," Andy said, spotting Frank and Todd's lights about 100 yards away. "Looks like the rest of the team is here." It had been lying there for what felt like an eternity. It couldn't say exactly how long. No light had touched it for an unknown span of time. Until 15 days ago, when everything changed. Now exposed to the cold, it was dying, cut off from its children. It was the queen of a species that lived deep underground, where dampness from above and warmth from within kept them alive for ages, though only in limited numbers. It was the first of its kind to reach the surface but had been separated from its offspring by a sudden earth shift and unexpected volcanic activity. It remembered climbing higher than any before, searching for new food sources. It had found a deep hole, an abandoned exploratory shaft left behind by miners seeking coal. Though blind, it sensed the open space above and craned its head upward. Its children stayed behind while it explored, making sure it was safe. Then came the shock, a rumbling that stunned it. Suddenly, volcanic gases thrust the rock beneath it upward at great speed through the shaft. Then the movement stopped abruptly, the fragile mine shaft collapsed inwards. It mourned its children. Without their queen, they would perish. They depended on it to trigger changes necessary for survival. Living deep underground, temperatures fluctuated wildly. Like their closest surface relative, the turtle, warmer conditions produced more females, colder times more males. They were monogamous and never numbered more than 1,000, confined to northwestern Europe. To keep balance, they evolved to switch genders once in a lifetime, triggered by a telepathic signal from the queen who chose the strongest candidates, those best suited for the change. This transformation rewrote their genetic code, converting chromosomes to XX or XY. The queen used the recipient's mental image of the opposite gender to guide the change, promoting diversity and ensuring the creature was content with their new form. The main risk was memory loss and confusion over identity, since their entire cellular structure was rebuilt. Recovering memories required patient questioning and support from their new mate, who helped them piece together their past, though seen now through their new perspective. During this time, they were highly suggestible to influence, blending new ideas with old memories until they became reality. It knew without the queen's guidance, they could not transform and would die. It knew it was dying. It struggled to free its massive body, stuck beneath rock and shale blocking its return underground. Slowly it lifted its neck, stretching its small flipper-like limbs to ease cramping. It sensed a group approaching. 4 figures, moving in pairs from opposite sides. Nervous. Unbalanced. It wanted to help them survive, not leave them lonely as it was, not watch their species die as its own would. It reached out, offering its gift. "There's that noise again, that shuffling we heard before," Frank said. Todd aimed his torch toward the depression formed when the earth collapsed around the old mine shaft, spotting some loose rocks falling. "I heard it," Todd replied. "Ted and Andy's waving looks like they heard it too," he added, watching their lights swing in arcs. "I feel something, a humming, a strong vibration," Frank said, trying to pinpoint it. "I don't know." Suddenly, he grabbed his head, his body trembling with pain. Seconds later, Todd doubled over, clutching his ears to block the inaudible noise, before both collapsed unconscious. On the other side of the pit, Andy and Ted also fell as silence returned. It was tired now, but satisfied. Satisfied that it had helped them survive. It sensed the transformation complete and the calm that followed. It was tired. Cheapside House, London, April 20th, 2001, 10:04 a.m. Sergeant James Mills was in a foul mood that morning. The office move yesterday had cost him his private office, relocating him to a newly renovated, open-plan space on the 6th floor overlooking Cheapside. He despised open-plan offices, the endless chatter, no privacy, and, if he was honest, the implied drop in status. He felt diminished. Adding to his worries was his daughter, still missing. At least she'd called to say she was safe and with someone, though she refused to reveal where or with whom. That meant he could tell Helen she wasn't on the streets. He'd asked Emily to return home, but she'd hung up without a word. He chastised himself for pushing too hard. She was old enough to make her own decisions. Keeping his personal troubles private, he sipped the scalding coffee from the Maxco instant vendor and winced as it burned his still sensitive lip. "Christ, this tastes terrible," he grumbled, slamming down the plastic cup he just paid 45p for. Turning around, he searched for his partner, Detective Tom Scott. "Pop out to Costa and get me a proper brew, will you? They can't expect us to function on this muck," he said, holding up the cup as Scott appeared. Scott glanced up at the harsh fluorescent lights and sighed. "Large espresso, Gov," he said matter-of-factly, knowing Mills's tastes well. Without looking, Mills tossed a couple of £1 coins to him. "Grab one for yourself too," he said, opening the Daily Mail. He'd spotted an article on page 5 during his commute but hadn't had the chance to finish it. Now, finally, he had some quiet time to read before Scott returned. 10 minutes later, Scott handed over Mills's coffee and answered the phone, which had rung a dozen times since his arrival. Hanging up, Scott looked expectantly as Mills tossed him the newspaper. "Here, read this and tell me what you think," Mills said, removing the lid and inhaling the rich aroma. "Ah, that's better," he murmured, careful not to burn his lip again. After finishing the article and his own coffee, Scott looked up. "Interesting, sir, but what's the relevance? How does it concern us?" Mills had been reading about 2 men who went missing on the Yorkshire moors 2 nights earlier. 4 local men had gone to investigate strange noises, never returned, and a search party was launched at dawn. They found 2 men, dazed, and a dead girl near the old mine site, Scott said. "But I'm not sure what it means for us." Mills looked to the ceiling in frustration, disappointed his partner lacked the instinct that had drawn him to policing, the curiosity to dig deeper. He picked up the paper again. "Did you notice one survivor mentioned 2 girls? One was dead, but no word on the other." Scott looked puzzled. Mills sighed. 4 men went out. 2 were found. 2 girls were nearby. 1 girl dead, the other missing. Doesn't that strike you as odd? "Well, when you put it like that, yeah, I guess it does," Scott admitted, suddenly intrigued. "Finally. I knew I'd spark the detective in you. That's exactly my point." Coroner's Office, Leeds, Yorkshire, April 20th, 2001, 11:48 a.m. "We've examined the body," Dr. Gary Gregson said, peeling off his coveralls. "She appears to be a normal, if somewhat unhealthy, 20-year-old female. Nothing remarkable. Any progress on the other girl?" he asked Sergeant David Geller, recalling the one found wandering the moors hours later, confused. "No. Nobody recognizes her. She's sedated now, babbling about being called Andy, but it's lost in hysteria. Funny coincidence, that's the name of one missing man. Maybe there's a connection, but she might never be fit for questioning," Geller shrugged. His mind clearly turning, Geller added, "She was wearing a man's heavy cable-knit jumper way too big for her." Dr. Gregson raised an eyebrow. "Have you checked the missing persons reports?" Geller bristled, a hint of offense. "Of course. The description's been circulated nationwide." Dr. Gregson asked again, "Did those 2 men see either of the girls?" He wasn't too confident in Sergeant Geller, not because of any fault in him, but Geller was more used to dealing with drunks and occasional sheep rustling than puzzling mysteries like this. Deciding to seek outside advice, Gregson planned to call a well-placed contact in London's police force. He had a bad feeling about this case and wanted an expert, impartial opinion. Leeds General Hospital, Yorkshire, April 20th, 2001, 3:30 p.m. Andy's eyes fluttered open, still foggy from the sedatives. He could barely turn his head but saw he was lying in a bed, surrounded by curtains. His mind was hazy, confusion clouding his thoughts. He recalled a deep rumbling noise, followed by a sudden sharp pain in his head. Beyond that, memories were fractured. He remembered a girl, he wasn't sure where she'd come from, screaming endlessly until he couldn't bear it and had pushed toward her. Then silence, and him wandering aimlessly, his body sending signals he couldn't understand. Strangely, he wasn't even sure who he was. He groaned softly, startled by his own voice. Trying to sit up, he felt an unfamiliar tightness around his chest. His thoughts struggled to make sense of his voice and body's strange sensations. At that moment, The curtain swished aside and Nurse Jenkins appeared with a reassuring smile. "Hello, dear," she said, pulling out a thermometer and placing it in Andy's mouth. "How are we feeling today?" She glanced at her watch as she took his pulse. "We? What does she mean by we?" Andy wondered, confused. Who am I? Where am I?" he asked after she removed the thermometer. Without looking up, the nurse entered the readings in a chart and set it at the foot of his bed. Then she smiled again and moved closer. "Well, sweetheart, we think your name is Andy, that's what you kept saying when found. You're at Leeds General Hospital under observation for now." Andy remained bewildered. His whole body felt wrong. Running his hands down his chest, he felt chests where he didn't expect them. He knew it wasn't right, but couldn't understand why. "Is there something wrong with me?" "Nothing feels right," he said, gripping her wrist firmly. Gently, Nurse Jenkins removed his hand and fluffed his pillows for comfort. "Lie back and try to relax," she soothed, easing him down slowly. "There's nothing wrong, dear. You look like a perfectly normal and pretty 20-year-old girl with her whole life ahead. Stop worrying, a doctor will see you soon." As Andy reclined, a wave of relief washed over her. Maybe the doctor could help explain everything when he arrived. Cheapside House, London, April 20th, 2001, 3:10 p.m. Sergeant Mills emerged from his inspector's office, smiling broadly. He'd learned they were heading to Leeds to assist the local investigations team with a mysterious incident. No details, just orders to report to the local detective inspector on arrival. He was just glad to finally have some action. Calling to Detective Scott, he said, "Come on, Scotty, move it. We're heading up north to Leeds tonight. Go grab us a car from the pool. We'll pick up some clothes and gear on the way." Rombay Moor, Yorkshire, April 20th, 2001, 8:20 p.m. Sergeant Geller jabbed at the grass with his stick, shining his torch on the ground ahead. Succumbing to pressure, he'd organized a search party to find the two missing men. Though he'd have preferred to wait until morning, convincing the relatives to hold off for a day, he knew he had to act now to avoid backlash. Leading 11 men, Geller planned to spend no more than 3 hours that night before regrouping to continue the search in daylight. They moved steadily across the damp, moss-covered moor, each man spaced about 10 feet apart. "Hey Sarge, isn't that where the girl was found?" one of the men called as Sergeant Geller aimed his torch toward the spot. "Looks like it." "Let's give it another thorough look," Geller said, and the team changed direction, heading toward the dark depression in the earth. It had awakened 30 minutes earlier, feeling weak. It knew it was dying. Another group was approaching, and it was unsettled. It sensed the imbalance and grew concerned. It would help them. It would help them survive. It reached out, offering its gift. The search party had taken just a few steps when a pulsating noise struck them. It seemed to invade every cell, forcing them to clutch their heads in agony. One by one, all 12 men collapsed, unconscious. Leeds Police Headquarters, Yorkshire, April 20th, 2001, 9:12 p.m. After a 4.5-hour drive, Mills and Scott arrived in Leeds. Mills decided they should check in at the station first to notify the inspector of their arrival before heading to their hotel. At the station car park, they approached the front desk, showing their IDs to a poker-faced constable. "I'm sorry, sir, but the inspector's tied up with a bit of a situation," the officer said, clearly enjoying his moment of authority over these southern flyboys. Mills didn't flinch. "Fine. Please let him know we're here at his request." "Maybe the situation is why we're here," he said, tone dripping with sarcasm. The constable paled, reaching for the phone to locate the inspector. About 10 minutes later, they were called into a medium-sized interview room with 4 chairs. Mills removed his jacket, tugged uncomfortably at his collar. No windows, the heat cranked high. "Christ, it's freezing outside. Don't they know what a thermostat is?" he grumbled, his distrust of the North seeping through. Scott remained silent, knowing his place. The door opened. Inspector Holmes entered, white-haired and stern-faced, walking purposefully. "Gentlemen," he said, shaking their hands. "Glad you could make it so quickly. Your timing is perfect." He sat down beside them, tugging at his collar too, visibly uncomfortable. "Apologies for the room, nothing else available right now. To business, you may have seen reports in the national press and TV about the two men who went missing 2 days ago." Mills's ears perked up, eyes gleaming. Finally, a case that stirred his detective instincts. Holmes continued after their nods. "One of our sergeants took a search party out tonight to look for them, not sure why he didn't wait until morning. They were due back 20 minutes ago, and we haven't heard from them. I've assembled a small team to head to Burley Wooden and find out what's going on. I suggest you join me in my car. I'll brief you as we travel." The drive lasted 30 minutes. Mills noticed how the darkness deepened as they left the city behind, driving along narrow roads and over the moors. They went straight to Sergeant Geller's home, hoping to find news or a message, but found nothing. His anxious wife brewed tea, desperate to do something rather than wait. While they drank, she described where she thought the search party had gone. The inspector decided to send out another group to look. "Sir," Mills said, "I don't think we should send too many more men out there. Do you have anyone who really knows the area? I want to go with them. I'm not sure any of the men I've brought know the moors well." "I'll check," Holmes replied, leaving the room. "I know these moors," Mrs. Geller interrupted. "I was born and raised in this village." Mills hesitated. "I doubt the inspector would approve a civilian wandering out there at night, especially with so many missing already." At that moment, the inspector returned. "No one here knows the moors well enough for a confident night search. We might have to camp out and continue first thing in the morning if they don't come back." Mrs. Geller let out a sharp, anguished cry. "No. That's my husband out there. I won't let you abandon him. I'll go look myself." Before Inspector Holmes could object, Sergeant Mills stepped in, explaining Mrs. Geller's determination to accompany him on the search. He fully supported her. Anything was better than waiting around doing nothing. 10 minutes later, Mills found himself walking beyond the village limits, ascending onto the moors. Mrs. Geller, who insisted he call her Laura, led the way with a strong torch and a walking stick. Though apprehensive leaving the streetlights behind, both felt better having a purpose. Laura guided them toward the spot where her husband had headed, the collapsed old mine shaft. It sensed the ones who had changed. Though resting now, they were balanced. When they awoke, adapting to their new selves would take time, but their mates would help. Acceptance was essential for survival. Others would guide them, revealing who they were. The changed would accept. Acceptance was key to preserving the species. 2 more entities approached. It was pleased they were balanced. It could rest now, it felt weak. Sergeant Mills radioed Inspector Holmes to report nothing found yet. The moors were eerily quiet. If no progress came soon, they'd return in the morning with a larger team. Seconds later, Laura tugged his sleeve, shining her torch on a lump nearby. "Look. That could be a body," she cried, equal parts fearful and excited. They moved quickly but carefully, soon discovering the body of one missing searcher. Mills knelt, checking the man's pulse. "He's alive," he said, feeling behind the unconscious man's ear and counting the steady beat. Laura scanned the underbrush with her torch, illuminating several scattered bodies. She covered her mouth, whimpering softly. "Don't stand there," Mills snapped, stopping her from panicking. "Check those nearby, I'll check the rest." Reassured the first victim would survive, he moved on. For yards away lay another body. He checked again, noting a surprisingly smooth neck. Closer inspection revealed a woman odd for a night search party. Calling to Laura, he asked, "Any women in the group your husband took?" "No," she replied. "Just 12 men. David wouldn't have let a woman go on a dangerous night search. He'd have a fit if he saw me here like this," she said, tending to her assigned victim. "Hey, this one's a woman too," she added, surprised. Within 5 minutes, They found a total of 12 unconscious bodies, 6 men and 6 women. Mills pondered the odd balance and wondered where the extra women came from and where the 6 men had vanished. Laura, quietly crying, looked around. "He's not here, Sergeant," she said, pointing to a badge on a woman's lapel. "That's his uniform, his badge. Why would he give his clothes to her? And what is he wearing now?" Her voice wavered with desperation. Examining the other women, Mills noticed they all wore men's clothing. He paused, considering the evidence carefully. A fan of Sherlock Holmes, Mills relished a baffling puzzle like this. Drawing inspiration from the famous detective, he reminded himself to consider every angle, keep an open mind, and eliminate impossibilities. If only the impossible remained, then that must be the answer, no matter how unlikely. In this case, the facts suggested the same party of 12 men had set out, but the 6 women must be the missing 6 men. Nothing else fit, though it was still a mystery. "Laura," he heard, "this one's stirring." He hurried to her side, finding her helping the woman who wore her husband's jacket. It was hard to believe this ordinary-looking woman had once been a seasoned police sergeant. Mills told Laura to care for her quietly. He wasn't ready to share his thoughts just yet. They'd think him mad. Another body began to stir. Within 15 minutes, most were awake and able to sit. Confusion reigned, only a few could string sentences together. Some men responded to their names, gaining clarity, but the women remained disoriented, unable to identify themselves. 20 minutes later, Inspector Holmes and his team arrived, alerted by radio when Mills and Laura found the victims. They'd kept torches lit and started a small fire to aid the search and warm the injured. When Laura returned to the village, she saw the woman she'd been caring for in the daylight for the first time. She went pale, grasping the woman's hand. "Olivia, Olivia, is that you? How can it be?" she whispered. The woman looked up at the kind lady who had been caring for her, and some of her confusion cleared. Olivia, yes, that was her name, Olivia Geller. Memories of playing with her older brother David came flooding back, bringing a smile as she recalled how he used to steal her dolls but always returned them, never meaning harm. At first, she viewed these memories from her brother's perspective, but soon her mind corrected itself, aligning her view as it should be. She nodded to the kind lady, now remembered as her sister-in-law, Laura. "Laura, it's good to see you again. How's David?" she asked, still feeling as though through a fog as her memories slowly returned. The scenes played like a film, but each minute made more sense. Oddly, her most vivid memories were from the distant past. There was little from her recent past. Laura turned to the doctor, examining one of the other women. "I know this woman," she said. "She's my sister-in-law. I'm going to take her home, if that's all right." "That should be fine," the doctor replied, relieved to have one less patient to worry about. "Just make sure she has a checkup in the morning, she really should be seen." As Laura led her away, she spoke softly to Olivia. "It's strange, David was talking about you just last night. He said how much he missed you since you moved to New Zealand. Why didn't you tell us you were coming back? And how did you end up here with that search party? I just wish David would turn up. I can't understand where he could be. I'm so worried," she continued, grateful to have something to focus on besides her missing husband. Sergeant Mills excused himself, craving a warm bath and a long glass of his favorite whiskey to think over his next steps. He planned to take Scott and investigate the mystery women, leaving Inspector Holmes and his men to search for the missing men, the initial 2 and the 6 lost that night. He doubted they'd be found but welcomed the freedom to follow his own inquiries. As he drained his glass, a pang of guilt hit him. In all this, he'd forgotten his missing daughter. He poured another stiff drink, hoping it would bring sleep. Leeds General Hospital, Yorkshire, April 21, 2001, 9:22 a.m. "She's acting a bit strange, Sergeant," Nurse Jenkins told the 2 officers. "She still can't remember anything from her past but seems content enough." One nurse brought her some makeup and styled her hair to cheer her up, to help her feel human again, but it didn't work. She seemed clueless about what to do with it. Sergeant Mills peered through the ward doors at the pretty young woman. "Is there somewhere private where we can talk to her? We want to help her discover who she is." "An open ward isn't ideal," he told Nurse Jenkins, studying the girl's almost childlike face. 10 minutes later, Mills, Scott, and the mystery girl sat in a cozy office, each with a steaming cup of tea. Mills led the conversation while Scott quietly observed. They introduced themselves and explained they wanted to help her learn about herself. As the interview went on, Mills grew more intrigued. It wasn't just her youthful looks, her demeanor radiated a naivety and lack of femininity he'd never seen in someone her age. It was as if she'd forgotten how a woman carried herself, seeming almost boyish in manner. They spent an hour talking, even switching roles so Scott could try his approach. Maybe she'd respond differently, maybe he'd uncover a clue. They left with little progress. As they prepared to go, Mills had a sudden thought, trying to recall the briefing and the names of the missing men. Andy Lewis, he said, watching the girl as a nurse led her back to the ward. He wasn't sure what he expected, but she spun around sharply, a look of shock on her face, as if grasping something. Then she was led sobbing back. "Nice one, Sarge. What was that about?" Scott asked, baffled by his boss's tactics. "Nothing, Scott. Let's go talk to the missing men's wives and girlfriends." Their first visit was to Ted Lewis's distressed wife. They learned nothing useful and returned to the car. "Well, Scott," Mills said, "we have two choices, the morgue or Andy Lewis's date that night. Maybe she can shed some light." "The girlfriend, definitely," Scott replied, "and then something to eat. I don't like staring at dead bodies before lunch." 20 minutes later, they arrived at Lisa Carter's house, where she lived with her widowed mother. Mills rapped sharply on the door, hoping Lisa was home. It was Saturday, and he hoped she wasn't out shopping or doing whatever young girls do to pass the time. A woman in her mid-40s opened the door, led them into the living room, and went upstairs to fetch Lisa. The house was a typical poor northern terraced home, 2 rooms up, 2 down, with paper-thin walls and floors. They could hear Lisa moving above as they waited, sipping the tea her mother brought. Just then, the door opened, and in walked the girl they had known as Andy, the same one they had interviewed at the hospital. They drove off in heavy silence, both men reflecting on what they had just witnessed. Their professional training had served them well, neither woman had suspected anything unusual. They had carefully and casually questioned Lisa and her mother, asking about siblings, whether her mother had other children, and Lisa's relationship with Andy, anything that might be relevant. When the questions grew more personal and the women became uncomfortable, they decided to leave. They stopped at the nearest pub for a pint and some lunch. Detective Scott finally broke the silence. "Sarge, whatever I expected, that wasn't it. Andy and Lisa could be twins, there's no way they aren't connected. It's unbelievable that they look so alike but aren't related." "I know," Mills replied. "I'm beginning to think my crazy theory might not be so crazy after all. Thanks, Sherlock." He raised his glass of lukewarm beer to the ceiling. "Theory? So you actually have some idea what's going on?" Scott asked, his eyes wide like Turner hearing Holmes's latest revelation. But he wasn't so lucky yet. "Not yet. But before I say anything, try this, take a taxi and bring Lisa Carter to the hospital. I want her to see our friend from earlier. Watch their reactions carefully." "Okay, Sarge. And where are you off to?" "The morgue. I'm going to see if my theory holds any weight." Mills's eyes gleamed with determination. Scott was relieved to avoid another dead body and set off to pick up Lisa. Mills drove off eagerly, though heavy traffic around Leeds slowed him. 45 minutes later, he arrived at the morgue. After showing his ID, he was led inside and asked to wait while an assistant fetched him to the body's location. The stark white walls caused an involuntary shudder as he thought of the countless bodies resting nearby. Though hardened by years on the force, he still shared Scott's queasiness. He hoped he never got used to it. An assistant appeared and guided him through a silent corridor into a cold room lined with drawers. "That's the one, mate," the assistant said, sliding open a large drawer. Mills's breath caught as the white sheet was pulled back, revealing a young woman's corpse. Despite her pale, taut skin, she was unmistakably a mirror image of Ted Lewis's wife, Kay. Mills turned and left quickly. For a brief moment, his training faltered as he thought how easily that could have been his own daughter. His stomach twisted with emotion. He resolved to call Helen that evening to see if she'd heard any news. He radioed Scott for an update from the hospital. Lisa had just left. Scott arranged a taxi for her and was still there. Mills told him to wait. He would meet him soon, it was only a short drive. Picking up Scott, they headed back to the village. "All right, Scott, what happened when you brought Lisa to see her?" Mills asked, checking the rearview mirror as they merged onto the main road. "Well, Sarge, Andy was asleep when we arrived but began stirring as we approached. Lisa was shocked to see what looked like an exact copy of herself staring up at her. She was speechless and just stared." Mills snapped impatiently, "And? How did Andy react?" She looked up, somewhere between sleep and wakefulness, said one word, "Lisa," then went back to confusion. "I asked if she knew Lisa or had seen her before, but she seemed to slip into a trance with no memory of her own words." "Did you ask Lisa if she'd ever seen this girl before?" Mills pressed, still sounding terse. "Of course, Sarge," Scott replied, offended. "She said no, she'd never seen her and had no idea who she was." "Right. Looks like another trip up to the moors is in order," Mills said thoughtfully, considering how to explain his theory to Inspector Holmes. He was convinced that the 8 men had somehow become women, though he couldn't explain how. Whatever had caused it was out there on the moors, and he was determined to find it. Rombay Moor, Yorkshire, April 21, 2001, 5:21 p.m. It stirred slowly, recalling a dream, memories of its children. It knew this was no dream. The chill confirmed reality. It was dying. It had grown accustomed to the cycle of light and warmth, followed by darkness and cold. It sensed the faint glow rather than saw it. It knew it wouldn't survive another full cycle. Darkness was closing in. It mourned for its children. It sensed another group nearby moving away. It felt the imbalance and longed to help. But they were too far to reach. Lizard Point, Cornwall, April 21, 2001, 6:45 p.m. Since running away, Emily Mills had been having the time of her life. It hadn't taken long for a pretty girl to hitch a ride southwest to Cornwall. She'd followed her memories of happier times there, back when she still had a family. She ended up in Newquay, a lively town, just what she needed, energy and fun. The remnants of Easter break surfers welcomed her warmly. The first night was a whirlwind of beer, joints, and laughter. Her new friends, carefree and kind, let her stay in their shared caravan. Though she didn't have her own bed and shared with another girl, she was content. No one tried anything untoward, she felt safe and relaxed. But the next night, expectations changed, something was expected in return for their hospitality. Emily fled, running into the night. She caught another ride to the Lizard Peninsula, Britain's southernmost point. Lonely and barren, it offered little shelter. She spent an uncomfortable night beneath an overturned boat, shielded only by a canvas top. The next day, tired and hungry, she spent her last money on food, then walked toward the peninsula's tip. No real purpose, just something to focus on. The thrill of running away faded fast. She missed her comfortable, pretty bedroom. She longed for hot meals and clean clothes, things always there, always taken for granted. Glancing at her watch, 6:30 p.m., depression crept in. The ecstasy she'd taken earlier was fading. One pill remained. She decided to take it now and find somewhere to sleep. It would numb her a little longer. She resolved this would be her last night away. Tomorrow she'd face the consequences. She'd had enough of wild living. Dusk was settling as she walked along a narrow track. A lighthouse stood nearby. She headed toward it, hoping to find shelter. 10 minutes later, she spotted lights from nearby houses just a couple hundred yards off and moved toward them.
In her confused, drug-altered state, she ignored the crashing waves far below and left the main path, choosing a scenic cliffside route. Suddenly, she lost her footing, tumbling down a sheer cliff into the sea. Unconscious from the fall, she felt nothing as the fierce current swept her out to sea, the Gulf Stream claiming her. Burley Wooden, Yorkshire, April 21, 2001, 9:25 p.m. James Mills lay submerged in his warm bath, only his nose above the waterline, a glass of whiskey within reach. This was his favorite form of meditation. Clarity often came this way. He planned to rest afterward, needing to be fresh for the morning's small search party around the collapsed mine shaft. He insisted on going with just one other. No one else would risk what he suspected awaited. Sharing his worries about his missing daughter with Scott earlier had eased some anxiety. He raised his head, swallowed a large sip of whiskey, then sank beneath the surface, reflecting on the afternoon's events. He hadn't yet told Inspector Holmes about his suspicions. Holmes had reported no results from the searches. They'd tracked where the men had been, found where Mills and Laura Geller met them, but no sign of anyone else. It was as if they had vanished. Mills thought back to his brief visit with Laura and her sister-in-law, the woman he now believed was once Sergeant Geller herself. When speaking of David Geller, she smiled warmly but still referred to herself in the third person. Mills had Scott check on the real Olivia Gregson. She was still in New Zealand and hadn't left the country. He wondered how they would break the news to Laura about the true identity of Olivia. How would this woman react upon discovering she wasn't really who she believed herself to be? What a headache that would be. His thoughts drifted to his call with Helen. She still hadn't heard from Emily, and somehow blamed him for her running away. She thought he wasn't doing enough to find her, and she was probably right. The idea of a 16-year-old girl wandering alone unsettled him deeply. She was far too young for that. Maybe he'd call Helen again in the morning. If so, he would try to be more understanding this time. She didn't need to be accused of overreacting, as he had unfairly suggested. He took another gulp of whiskey and refocused on the case. Something was nagging at him, a question he couldn't quite grasp. Why hadn't all the men changed? Why only some? Was there something about those affected that made them susceptible? What did the changed have in common? No obvious links emerged. Why had Ted and Andy disappeared or transformed while Frank and Todd were mostly unaffected, aside from their brief unconsciousness? The water was cooling now. He downed another swallow and prepared to get out. He thought about how many men had been affected and why neither he nor Laura had changed. 8 men missing, 8 confused new women found. 4 had gone out on the first night, and 2 men and 2 women, were found the next morning. Goosebumps prickled his skin as the pattern became clear. The answer was right before him. How many men went on the second search? 12. How many found the next morning? 12, 6 men and 6 women. That was it. He could feel it. Maybe nothing happened to him or Laura because they were an even pair, 1 man and 1 woman. Perhaps whatever caused the transformations balanced the genders of anyone near it. Both search parties had been found with equal numbers of men and women. It sounded outrageous. How could nature cause such changes? He was certain science hadn't advanced enough to manipulate genetics on this scale. He recalled articles about fish changing gender due to pollution, sewage with estrogen altering river fish, but nothing like this. He went to bed, eager for tomorrow's daylight search. Rombay Moor, Yorkshire, April 21, 2001, 9:45 a.m. They'd been lucky. The morning mist had cleared, leaving a dry, bright day. Sergeant Mills had convinced the inspector to let him search alone with just one partner. They had 4 hours before the main party followed. Inspector Holmes was reluctant to risk more men without cause. So far, the tight-knit community had kept the media at bay, but it was only a matter of time. Despite the inspector's doubts, Mills persuaded him to allow a policewoman to accompany him. If his theory was right, he didn't want to risk losing his masculinity alongside another man. The inspector wasn't keen, believing the task unsuitable for a woman, but Mills's persistence won out. Walking over the moors, Mills navigated easily in the daylight. He glanced at his companion, an attractive woman, though not classically beautiful. She tried making small talk, but he ignored her, burdened with his thoughts. Haunting him was the dream from the night before, one involving Emily. The details were fuzzy, but it left him with a deep sense of dread. He fought the urge to call Helen again but resolved to wait until evening. It hadn't rested, wanting to savor every final moment of its existence before returning to the eternal sleep from which it had come. It knew its time was short. Weak and fading, life was slipping away. Just as it began to slip into a final coma, its senses sharpened one last time. It detected a small herd. It sensed imbalance. It wanted to help. It mourned its children. It tried to share its gift. The herd was too distant. It waited. The herd was drawing nearer. It would save them. It would share its gift. One last time. Lisa Turner watched the police sergeant stride purposefully toward the site of the first disappearance, as if driven by something she couldn't understand. He ignored all her attempts at conversation, brushing them off with curt replies. She'd been disappointed. This was the first assignment with responsibility since her operation, and she'd struggled for acceptance, often the subject of jokes in the station canteen. As she reflected on her troubles, a faint disturbance passed through her body, so slight yet penetrating deep into her being before fading away. It left her with a sense of unease and foreboding. Sergeant Mills felt the same disturbance and instinctively knew he was close to what he sought. The unfamiliar sensation bolstered his confidence that he'd correctly identified and anticipated how the changes had affected the others. He walked forward with purpose, focusing intently to push aside the lingering unease from his troubling dream about Emily, though the mental image refused to fade. At the edge of the collapsed mine shaft, the disturbance hit again, much stronger this time. The rumbling seemed to shake every fiber of his being as he clutched his head and spun around, only to see the policewoman mimicking him. His last thoughts questioned how he had miscalculated so badly before darkness claimed him. It felt the change. It was content. As before, it had transformed the strongest one. It had helped them survive. It knew the end was near. It grieved for its children. Taking a final breath, it gazed upward with unseen eyes at alien skies. Its head slumped on its aching body. It was over. Burley Wooden, Yorkshire, April 21, 2001, 11:12 a.m. Detective Scott grew increasingly impatient. An hour had passed since Sergeant Mills's last communication, and he was eager for action. He had urged Inspector Holmes to move and finally, Holmes relented, announcing they'd set off in 10 minutes. Scott lit his fourth cigarette in half an hour and asked a local constable for a light. Though preoccupied with thoughts of what might have happened, he noticed the constable and another officer sharing a joke. He was annoyed. This was no time for levity. "Oi, what's so funny?" he demanded brusquely as the officer lit his cigarette. The laughter stopped abruptly. The officer considered whether to include the newcomer. "Well, it's your sergeant insisting on taking a woman up on the moor instead of one of us red-blooded men, or even you," he said, making sure to sting. The locals resented these southern experts and enjoyed poking fun. "Sorry, I don't get it," Scott replied coolly, taking a deep drag. The officer glanced at his mate and grinned again. "Well, we didn't think it right for him to take some poor defenseless girl alone out there who knows what he might get up to or what might happen, so we sent him with Lisa Turner." Scott bristled at the clear jab but kept his composure, wanting to understand why this was so amusing. "When do I get in on the joke?" he pressed. "Lisa isn't what she seems," the officer teased, drawing out the moment. 1 or 2, 3, 4. Scott counted silently, holding back anger. His sergeant and colleague might be in danger, and he knew this information could be crucial. "She used to go by Harold," the officer revealed, then burst into laughter with his friend at Scott's stunned expression. "She was a he until 9 months ago, before getting his crown jewels cut off and growing a pair of tits." Scott stood frozen, absorbing how Harold had become Lisa. He didn't know why Mills insisted on a female partner yet suspected it wasn't good news. Mills had pushed hard, even defying the inspector, to have a woman accompany him to avoid suffering the same fate as those who'd gone missing. Now he realized Mills had gone up there with someone who'd been biologically male just 9 months prior. He didn't know if it mattered, but suspected it did. 5 minutes later, Scott headed toward the spot where Mills had set off with his female companion. Rombe Moor, Yorkshire. Lisa Turner slowly pushed herself up from the ground, her arms stiff from lying on it too long. She barely remembered the strange rumbling sensation before everything went dark. Groaning softly, she looked around and spotted a slumped figure just a few feet away. Confusion clouded her mind as she struggled to recall who she was and where she was, but gradually her memory started to return. She remembered the search and the curt sergeant she'd been with. She stumbled over to the figure and immediately sensed something was wrong. A young girl lay there, oddly dressed in the sergeant's clothes. Shaking her shoulder gently, Lisa tried to rouse her, desperate to learn who she was, how she had gotten there, and what had happened to the sergeant. Dazed, Mike Mills slowly woke to someone shaking him. His body ached all over, his thoughts jumbled. All he knew was someone was shaking him, and he hated that. "Hey, stop that," he snapped, turning to see a strange woman with her hand on his shoulder. His own voice startled him. Something was different, though he couldn't place it. Sitting up, he looked down at himself and something felt off. Though he had believed himself to be a man, the body beneath the ill-fitting clothes was clearly that of a young girl. She tried to recall who she was and why she was there but couldn't grasp anything familiar. All she knew was a strange woman was looking at her critically, asking questions she couldn't answer. Detective Scott felt relieved when he heard from policewoman Turner minutes ago. That relief faded quickly upon learning his colleague was missing and yet another girl had been found. Where were all these people coming from? Then he spotted figures waving in the distance and led the party toward them, quickening his pace. The taller figure appeared all right, but when the girl beside her turned to face them, Scott recognized her immediately from the photographs on the police sergeant's desk. Emily Mills, is that you?" he gasped, stunned to see the last person he expected. He knew from his sergeant that she'd gone missing, but how could she be here? Emily saw the man talking to her and for the first time remembered something. She didn't know who he was but sensed he knew her, and the name Emily Mills felt comfortably familiar. Suddenly, memories flooded her mind, her birth, first days at school, countless moments. It was strange, as if she were watching herself from outside her own body, seeing her life in the third person. She didn't mind, she was just grateful to have an identity again. She recalled an argument with her mother but couldn't remember the details, only that she wanted to go home. Still confused, the anxious man pressed her. "Come on, Emily, I need to know, is that you?" Yes, I suppose so," she replied hesitantly, everything feeling unreal. "Thank God. Your father's been worried sick. What are you doing out here?" he asked, concerned now about Sergeant Mills. My father?" Emily repeated, unsure whom he meant. "Yes, your father, James Mills. Have you seen him here?" Scott asked again. She didn't answer. Her mind spun as memories of James Mills flooded in with far more clarity than those of Emily herself. Her head throbbed trying to piece it all together as a policeman led her away. Farnborough, Surrey, April 21, 2001, 6:33 p.m. Helen Mills greeted her daughter tearfully as she was brought home by car, accompanied by a policewoman. Darling, she sobbed, holding Emily close. "Don't ever do that again. I've been beside myself with worry. You mustn't scare me like that. You're going to be a good girl now, aren't you?" Her words were more a demand than a question. Emily felt relief seeing the woman she now knew was her mother. James Mills's memories had recognized Helen as Emily's mother, and as Emily herself, her memory was reprogrammed from this new perspective. This constant reshaping of memory was part of her changed state, her past life being rewritten or discarded. "I'm sorry, Mum," she said sincerely. "I'll never do anything like that again." I'm going to be a good girl now. Farnborough, Surrey, July 9, 2001. In recent weeks, Helen had noticed that whatever her daughter had endured during her absence had caused a deep fracture within her. Emily couldn't recall what had happened in those missing days and seemed to have large gaps in her recent memory. Even stranger was how she appeared to have forgotten many basic, instinctive things a girl naturally picks up growing up. Helen found herself reteaching her about hair care, makeup, menstruation, and countless other small details that shape a woman's life. Though it had been upsetting at first, Emily had proved to be a quick learner. The intense time they spent together drew them closer. Emily was happy being the daughter Helen had always hoped for, and Helen began to think something positive might have emerged from the ordeal. Emily had even started dating a nice boy from school, one Helen approved of, and the relationship seemed to be progressing seriously. All in all, Helen was proud of her daughter and looked forward to the day she might become a grandmother. The only lingering mystery was James. He hadn't been seen since that day on the moors. Emily had been deeply upset over his disappearance, so close to him, but seemed to be moving on. It was amazing what a relationship with a good-looking young man could do for a girl. Cheapside House, London, July 9, 2001. Tom Scott sat at his desk during a rare quiet spell. As usual, his thoughts drifted back to Sergeant Mills and his strange disappearance. No one ever uncovered what had happened to Mills or the other missing men, but rumors swirled, adding another legend to the already mysterious moorlands. Since then, no new disappearances or strange sightings had occurred. They had discovered an unidentified creature near the old mine shaft, but aside from being a new species, nothing suggested it caused the men's vanishings or the appearance of unknown women. Scott often wished Mills had confided in him about his suspicions instead of dramatizing them in a Sherlock Holmes-style revelation, which may have contributed to his downfall. Recalled to London shortly after Mills vanished, Scott had gradually lost touch with the stalled investigation. But he was determined not to let it end there. With leave coming up, he planned to investigate privately, especially the strange appearances of the mysterious women, whom he believed held the key. Emily Mills also unsettled him. Something about her presence at the same place and time her father went missing felt off. His instincts told him she wasn't quite what she seemed. Before he could ponder further, the office door slammed. "Scott, have you finished that report yet?" barked his new sergeant. Startled, Scott snapped back to the present. If he didn't finish the report, he wouldn't get home tonight. The new sergeant was strict about routine. He bent over his desk and began typing again, pushing all other thoughts aside. If you appreciated this story and wish to show your support, don't forget to join me on Patreon for exclusive content.